Hi, Rachel, and welcome to The Political Mommy. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So, before we get started, I really want to have my audience understand who you are as a human before we talk about the politics and all of that. So, you were born and raised at the Jersey Shore.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And what is your favorite thing about growing up there?
I mean, the ocean is my happy place. And there's actually like scientific theory. It's called like the blue mind theory on how it like balances like your ions in your brain and makes you feel more grounded and more calm. So I think growing up by the Jersey Shore is an experience unlike any other. And I'm happy to be raising my 5-year-old by the Jersey Shore too.
And let's talk about what Jersey Shore exactly are we talking about? Because I go to the South Jersey Shore, so this is a little bit different.
Right. Okay. So I grew up in Central Jersey and it does exist, but like all of my family is from the Cape May County area. So they think I grew up in North Jersey and then North Jersey thinks I'm from South Jersey, but this is Monmouth and Ocean County. Anything from down by like Forked River and up all the way up to Middletown. So it's about exit 74 to like exit 110 on the Parkway, I believe.
Okay, awesome. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What does your son thinking about mom running for Congress? Does he have any thoughts about it?
He has thoughts. He's very opinionated. He's like, I miss the good old days before you were running for Congress. I'm like, where did you come up with that terminology? But he's really cute. So like I bring him with me to a lot of different events to the extent possible, because I think that most political spaces are not that family friendly. And we have a huge pipeline crisis in American politics where obviously we have a gerontocracy, which if you don't know the term, population is much older than the actual society that it represents. So I think if you look at the median age of the members of the House of Representatives, it's not necessarily reflective of people like you and I who are currently raising families and dealing with the consequences of the policies that they have passed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
So how did you talk to your son about running for Congress? Because he's 5. So.
Right.
And how are you beginning to have these sort of political conversations with a child that young?
Yeah, so I try and simplify it into terms that a little kid can understand without being like too scary, right? So pretty much we know that there's bad guys and good guys. Mommy is trying to be one of the good guys. And also even like that's gendered language, right? But I'm trying to be one of the good people, the good humans, and make sure that everybody can see a doctor when they're sick and has a home and has food in the fridge for when their tummy is hungry. I really just try to put it into simple terms for my son so that he understands like, well, why would my mom be doing all of this? I mean, he has immigrant friends, and so he's starting to get a sense for the fact that, like, there's something going on, and mommy doesn't want anyone to feel afraid.
I love that, and I think it's really important, especially when we're thinking about kids, because we think that a lot of times parents' first instinct is to shelter and to not talk about, these really big, heavy concepts.
Yeah.
But when you really do break them down into a kid-friendly way, it's very attainable for them to grasp, and I think it creates better adults as they grow.
And I think that what you see with children is like these concepts seem very straightforward to them. They're like, well, yeah, that doesn't even make sense. Why would people be taking my friend's family? And so there's a balance to find too, because you don't want to steal their innocence.
100%.
But you also don't want them to put their head in the sand and not recognize that like certain people in our country have privileges that other people do not.
100%. So if you weren't running for office, what would you be doing? Is there a version of you that never got into politics?
I never envisioned myself getting into politics whatsoever. I think like many people, I was a keyboard warrior at a certain point in time, probably looking back to the COVID era and what happened to George Floyd. I was very much like online and angry, but I wasn't plugged into like how to make a difference on the ground. And then last year, I started getting really heavily involved in local advocacy, working with nonprofits and grassroots organizations, just in my free time between pickup and drop off for preschool, while also running my own business, which is more like marketing and communications for nonprofits. So no, I did not anticipate being a politician. I still don't feel like a politician. I'm just a person who sees that there's a problem and wants to change it. And if I couldn't do that from the outside as an advocate, then let me see if I can get in and make some change.
I think we need more of that politics without necessarily like career politicians.
I think that's the founding fathers' vision for the House of Representatives was people from all different walks of life with different skills and backgrounds coming together to solve problems for people and work collaboratively. I'm not, Jamie Raskin. I'm not a constitutional law expert, but I would certainly love to have some conversations with Jamie Raskin about how to fix some of the things that we've seen go off the rails in our country. But maybe I can come in and I can talk to folks about like, hey, how can we communicate to the American public a little bit differently so that they feel like we care about them and
100%.
Not about our donors and special interests, and really just also bringing the working person's experience to Congress, which is sorely lacking right now. The person I'm running against has been in Congress for 45 years. And prior to that job, I think worked at like a family business in retail. So like this individual hasn't lived through what most of us have when it comes to like just the cost of living, the realities of holding down sometimes multiple jobs or dealing with trying to secure health care. And, when you've been in a cushy government job with all of the benefits that come with that for multiple decades, you have no concept of what people are going through.
Yeah, reality is a bit out of touch for you at that point. Yeah. And I also feel like our founding fathers didn't necessarily think that politicians would be millionaires or, be some of the richest people in our country, which is obviously another conversation.
So many conversations.
So as you've said, you are a millennial. You are running against a guy who's been in office since 12 years before you were born.
Yes.
We know that he has been actively fighting against reproductive health care for decades. He cut funding for health care and food for single parents and kids. And I'm curious, did those cuts personally affect you in any way?
So the defunding of Medicaid and SNAP and Social Security to an extent is kind of part of why I'm doing all of this, because unbeknownst to many people, both my son and I are on New Jersey Family Care, which is what our state calls Medicaid, as is my older sibling who is disabled. And so it was very clear to me once I realized that these massive changes were going to go through that I had to stand up and do something. There's a lot of misconceptions around Medicaid and other programs like that about, who they support and who they benefit. People have a misunderstanding of who those programs serve. They think, and this is like a talking point, they think it's the guy in the mom's basement playing video games who's just lazy and doesn't want to work. Meanwhile, it's over 90% of people who benefit from Medicaid are either caregivers or disabled themselves. There's a reason why they're on that program, and it's not because they're lazy. I'm a working mom. I have my own small business, and because I work for myself, I don't have access to employer-sponsored health care. And does that mean that my 5-year-old shouldn't be able to see the doctor when he's sick? No. So I think that a big part of what I was attempting to do is take away the stigma from these critical programs and try to lift up the fact that there are real people, working people even, who rely on them.
Yeah, I think I read a stat recently that 60% of homeless people have a job.
It's quite a reflection on this country that you can be working and still not even be able to put a roof over your head at night. And that's a reality far too many people experience.
100%. So you have been very open about your domestic violence experience and your experience as a survivor. So I would like to know, at what point did you decide to turn that personal pain into public advocacy, and what did that turning point feel like for you?
I think that I would mention it in the context of how I ended up on Medicaid, and it wasn't even like a conscious decision to do it. But then as we saw the national narrative changing around survivors of not just domestic abuse and violence, but also like sex trafficking and things, and we saw even in pop culture, right, with like Cassie and Diddy, like there's just this pervasive issue across all levels of society when it comes to women and children being abused, and then no one is held accountable for it. And I can't abide by that. I know that personally when I was younger, there was a lot of internalized shame, like a lot, and most survivors experience this, where they feel like it's their fault somehow, or that they're alone and isolated in it. And now we're seeing from the families to the schools, to the churches, to the workplaces, to the government, and all the way to the upper echelons of society, that this is almost a part of our society, that it's like baked in and structural. And so something has to change, and it can't just be thoughts and prayers in the same way it can't just be thoughts and prayers about getting real safety measures put in place for our kids so we don't have to be afraid as parents to send them to school. And so I think it felt like a calling. All of this has felt like I'm just being called to do it. It's not necessarily something I envisioned for myself, but if I feel like I can figure out how to be helpful and turn the experiences that I've had into a way to help others, then I'm going to do that.
That was beautiful. So survivors often face enormous barriers, financial, legal, emotional, when they try to leave their abusers. What systemic changes would you specifically fight for in Congress to make leaving safer and more accessible? I think back to the Illinois race with Kat Abu-Ghazali. She was really fighting for like a universal income for stay-at-home parents. So that way, if they were, in a less than ideal situation, they could leave because they would have the financial means to do so. And also that could contribute towards retirement and things like that, so that, women and sometimes men as well, have this opportunity to leave really horrible situations. So again, what sort of systemic changes would you be fighting for in Congress?
Well, there are a lot of changes that need to be made, and not just for people to be able to leave and leave safely, because we know that when you leave is the riskiest moment, and some people don't make it out. And I know that I was also in a position to be like, I don't know if I would even feel comfortable to call police, because my son's father is a Black man and an immigrant, and I don't want to have to carry any kind of harm that might come to him on my conscience, even though I'm also struggling right now with protecting myself and my child. Like, there are just far too many problems that survivors face. And so, yes, leaving is really challenging. And a lot of times it's like, if you show up at a bank and you're like, I left without anything, which I did. I left with a stroller, a diaper, and my phone and my child. And I didn't have my license on me. I didn't have a form of identification. I didn't have my wallet, and I'm trying to get a debit card. And they're like, but you don't have the proofs that you need to have access to your own money. And I'm like, I have a picture of my license on my phone. Can I show you that? And they had to go above their supervisor to even issue me a new debit card. If you're showing up in distress and you need access to your own money, it shouldn't be so hard to get it. And people shouldn't have to break the rules and risk their own employment to do that for you. So that's one. Two, then breaking the lease on the apartment that you were in can be really complicated, because what if that lease was also your partner's name was on it? And that happened to me. And so it was very much this financial abuse where it's like, well, you can't kick me out of here because I'm on the lease. That bank account that's paying for that rent is attached to me. And so now I'm on the hook, and I'm trying to struggle with a landlord to get out of a situation where I can't even physically go to the building and have a conversation or get my belongings back. And I could go on and on and on with the number of issues that people face, systemic structural barriers. So there's a lot we need to do. And when it comes to what you were mentioning with Kat and with parents who are stay-at-home parents, we know right now that 1 in 4 women in the past year left the workforce, and almost half, I believe, it was because of the cost of childcare and the struggles of not having flexible work and being able to juggle it all. So I, A, as a working mother and single mother, and B, having been raised by a stay-at-home mother, I really value the work that often women, not always women, but often women are doing in the household. And it's uncompensated, and it's unappreciated, and it's unrecognized work. And it does contribute to the economy. Because if you think about it, if I say I'm not going to watch my kid anymore, I have to put them in a daycare or get them a nanny, someone has to be paid for that. But if you're doing it, sorry. So I think that we really need to reconsider, what is it that we subsidize with our tax dollars? We can subsidize fossil fuel companies that have been polluting the air our children breathe for decades, but we can't subsidize the true work that women are doing in the household, moms, parents, to raise the next generation of society, which society can't continue without children. So it's an economic and societal service. And you're 100% correct that if you don't have the financial means, you can get trapped in an abusive relationship for longer. So what I've been looking at is, in Flint, Michigan, there's something called RX Kids. And it has bipartisan support. Democratic and Republican elected officials supported it. It had over 90% buy-in from the local community. Did not matter your income level, you could access it. And essentially it was payments to families from pregnancy to the age of 3, which is the most critical period of development for our children, to make life a little bit easier. And if you're a stay-at-home mom, that money's going to be helpful, especially if you end up needing to get out. So I want to look at programs that actually make sense, that have been proven out probably in a pilot program and people aren't aware of it, or it hasn't been scaled, or it hasn't been funded. And with federal dollars, I can do that. That shouldn't only be accessible in one community. Everyone in America should be able to do that.
I love that. I'd never even heard of that before. So that's definitely interesting. I'll have to look more into that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So how does your survivorship inform the way you approach policy, especially legislation that claims to protect families but may actually harm vulnerable women?
This came up a lot with Chris Smith because Chris Smith founded the pro-life caucus in Congress. He co-chairs it, and he's prevented a lot of women from having access to reproductive health services, right? There was a defunding of centers across America that provide those healthcare services, and often based on misinformation, right? Those centers, they offer a lot more services, preventative services, the ability to choose when you want to become a parent, right? And
cancer screenings.
And what a lot of people don't know is oftentimes in abusive relationships, impregnating someone is a way to trap them. It is one of the forms of abuse that is used to keep people from leaving. And so if you're limiting someone's access to be able to control their own body and whether or not they end up with more children, whether or not they wanted to, it can keep someone trapped in domestic violence for longer, A. B, if you look at it from the perspective of voters whose number one issue is the sanctity of life, which I've looked at it from that perspective, that's actually the perspective I was raised in. I was raised in a born-again believing Christian household. I fundraised for pregnancy centers that Chris Smith actively supports. And I understand that in the minds of sanctity of life voters, they are trying to prevent children from being murdered. That is their mindset. And so I'm like, hey, Chris Smith has had 45 years to accomplish your desire of getting a full nationwide abortion ban, which is not going to happen because we are 50 separate states. And in New Jersey, we have a lot of protections for women. What we could do is we could go about things a better way. And we could make sure that should a woman find herself experiencing an unplanned pregnancy, she has the choice to bravely become a parent and a single parent in this economy. And you cannot tell me that putting safeguards in place and structural supports wouldn't do what you want to be done. Because I am a single mom and I know exactly how hard it is to do what they want people to do. So if you knew, okay, I'm going to have guaranteed paid leave from work. My job's going to be waiting for me when I come back. I'm not going to lose that ability to provide for my kids. If I knew that I would have government funding, which is not government funding, it's our tax dollars, it's working people.
Very good.
Towards childcare. If my kids can start in the preschool at the age of 3, which many kids in New Jersey can, but it's only certain towns. And some towns it's guaranteed, some towns it's a lottery. Like, why do some people have services that others don't? All of our kids should be able to start preschool at 3 if the family wants them to. And they should be able to see the doctor when they're sick. They should be able to get their preventative care that, when kids are little, you know this too, you're the political mommy. There are so many doctor's appointments. For the first 2 years, you're at the pediatrician constantly. And so why don't we go about it a different way? Support those kids, make sure that they aren't only born, but then they have an amazing quality of life. Yes. And their parents aren't struggling to provide for them. Because when you're financially unstable, it's a lot harder to be a good parent. Yeah. It's a lot harder to give your kid everything that they deserve. So why don't we all work together? Because I want to support kids. I want to support moms, but I don't want to put women at risk, get them stuck in abusive relationships, or make it so that the decisions that should be made between them and their doctor are being made by politicians.
I 100% agree. And I think too, when we look at children specifically, after obviously they're born, and like you're saying, the doctor's appointments, the dentist, activities, if we want them to be, in sports or extracurriculars, whatever. And then we look at different area or zip codes within the state and we see the different resources that different kids get. Yeah. And they might only be 5 minutes away from each other in a neighboring town, but that town doesn't have access to even a grocery store, for example, right? So it's
deserts,
and it's that is pivotal to raising a child, to providing them healthy food options. When I was teaching in Camden, I had students come in all the time and their parents could just stop at the corner store because they didn't have transportation. And guess what the corner store had? Candy, chips, soda. Right. So a lot of cavities, a lot of, teeth rotting out of the mouth, and your oral health is directly correlated to your heart health. Yeah. So like all of these things are really important in raising a child. Yeah. And we aren't providing the parents with those tools. And I feel like the other side always wants to blame the parent. Well, the parent's lazy, or, they don't, they could get a job with healthcare. And it's like, well, can they? Because a lot of times that's, sometimes not the case. And also I had parents that would come to me in tears because they got a job, but their job, they're now making like $1.25 over.
And now they don't have access to that. Listen, healthcare in America is literally not working for anyone. I can walk you through each different option and the flaws with it, right? So as someone who's currently on Medicaid, I can tell you that I need referrals for everything. And it's like, guys, I have a chronic skin condition that I've had for about a decade now. Why do I need a new referral every few months, and then I'm missing appointments and I'm not able to access care that I'm just always going to need? Just put it in the darn system and leave it there. But it's more paper pushing, it's more reimbursements, it's blah, blah, blah. Then you have Medicare. And we have seniors who are having to go and spend down all of their life savings to be able to access their end-of-life care, their long-term care, the nursing home on Medicare. Then you have the marketplace.
Which, by the way, destroys generational wealth, because now people are selling their homes that they have paid
Unless
off.
You're wealthy enough to know and do multiple years in advance, get your money into a trust, this, that, the other thing, which, like, if you're not wealthy, you don't have a financial advisor doing any of that for you. Okay, so then you look at the marketplace, which, to the credit of the administration that passed it, gave so many more people access to healthcare, got many more people insured, but it's still flawed because right now we have private insurers, and we have very large healthcare organizations and big pharma that are polluting our systems and making it so expensive. Thinking about it, let's say you go to the ER and you just need like an IV of fluid because you're dehydrated, or you have a horrible migraine, it's debilitating, and they give you an ibuprofen in the ER. How much is that costing? So then our tax dollars end up subsidizing the overly inflated cost of care. And then there's debates between the left and the right about the subsidies. And like, I see both sides of that, where it's like, yeah, we shouldn't have to subsidize care at this cost, but that requires going after predatory private companies, which our elected officials aren't going to do because it's their donors, right? But we also can't just yank out those subsidies when people can't afford to be paying 100% or 150% more for their healthcare. It is on our elected officials to create a system that works for everyone so that nobody is left with a gap in coverage, so that these corporations aren't profiting off of illness instead of investing in wellness. And if you even look at the private and employer-sponsored healthcare system, even that is not working well. Because, I have a friend, she just gave birth to her first child within the past 6 to 8 months, and her husband make really good money, and they have really good healthcare. And they were charged over $8,000 to have their baby. So what are you even paying for healthcare at that point?
I know.
You might be able to do it out of pocket cheaper. There are people who've done like, tests where they're calling around and shopping for how you can get services at the cheapest. Like, this is insane. People don't know this. I love going down rabbit holes. 80 years ago this summer in New York City, America's Surgeon General presided over a meeting of international countries from around the world, and they all made a constitution for health across the planet and agreed that healthcare is a human right. We presided over that meeting, and we're the only ones that didn't then go on to guarantee it to people.
I did not know that.
80 years this summer.
I had to have heart surgery last year, and 2 days before my surgery, they called me and said I have to bring $4,000 to my heart. I'm like, this is not like my big toe, it's like crazy.
Yeah.
$1,000 just to make sure that like I can like live
walk
healthy,
out. Yeah.
It's genuinely
unacceptable.
So you described doing this campaign work in between preschool drop off and pick up. What do you want other single moms or parents in general to take away from seeing you specifically run for Congress?
I want to be transparent about the process so that people can say like, yeah, I can do that too. Or can be like, that's messed up. Oh my gosh, this poor woman.
Yeah.
But no, I want I want to, there's always been something that we've been taught, you've probably been taught, which is like, if you can see it, you can be it. And representation does matter. And when you look at just the representation of moms in Congress, it's like there's this kind of like little chart of all the seats in the House. And it's like this little sliver over here is the moms. And then this is the moms with kids under 6. And then I can't even find data on single moms in Congress. And how many of our programs support single moms? What percent of families in America are led by single parents in general? Like, we no longer have that like nuclear family unit in every family. So why aren't there people representing us who understand what it's like to navigate the systems and see what are those gaps in the systems to then change them and inform them? And I'm not going to Congress being like, I have all the answers. I have a lot of answers, but they're informed by either domestic programs that have been piloted on a small scale that work really well and have data to prove them out and just need amplification, scaling, and funding, or international programs that have decades of data behind them. Like when we look at healthcare, every developed nation in the world except for us offers everyone a basic healthcare that they have to be able to access. And there is like this boogeyman concept around healthcare for everyone that you're either going to wait forever or the quality of care is going to go down. You're not going to be able to have elective surgeries. There's all these kind of stories that we've been told as Americans for like why that is not the right approach. And it's like, yeah, but we have the most expensive healthcare and we're the richest nation in the world and we have a lot of really bad outcomes. And I'm like, we're not going to get rid of any of our doctors. Like all of the doctors that we have will still be in our healthcare system. It's just that they won't be wasting time on administrative burden, filing all the different forms of insurance, paperwork, reimbursements, this, that. And they can focus more on their patients. And we also have to look at like wellness culture. It's not just about going to the doctor when you're sick. It's about what are the systems that are making us ill in the first place. I know there's the whole Make America Healthy Again movement, right? And so all of the moms who were like, oh, you know, RFK Jr. is going to go in there and he's going to get rid of the pesticides and the plastics and the dyes and the chemicals that our kids are being fed. That's not what's happened.
Nope.
They're actually spraying more chemicals on our crops at this point.
The farming bill, I think it's up for voting.
I think I saw that.
And I'm pretty sure that pesticides is thrown in there too. And Maha is very upset about it, rightfully so. And I think that a lot of people are starting to wake up to this idea that they were sold a lie, right? Like that, like they ran with the dyes thing because everyone
was on board with it.
Was on board
like
with it. It's a very relatable thing because we see our kids struggling with it, right? And then it's like that can't be the only piece, though. You can't fix the dye problem, but then still pollute our air, our water.
Soil our food is grown in.
Yes.
The GMO seeds that now, like the farmers don't even own their own seeds. They like rent their seeds. Like there's been this whole movement in our society and our economy towards everything is now a commodity. You don't own anything. We don't have CDs anymore. We stream. We don't have DVDs anymore. We stream. And then like if you stop paying for that monthly service, then everything, you lose access to everything. So everything is just, nothing belongs to us anymore.
No,
we can't buy houses.
I mean, like,
we can't.
I know. Well, even if you can buy a house and you pay it off, if you can't afford your taxes, you lose the house. It's pretty crazy. So what does it say about our political system that so few elected officials have lived the reality, like you were saying, of being a single parent, trying to make ends meet? We have these politicians who have been in there for decades and decades and decades, who have health care for life, right? Who have, you know, a cushy job. Many of them have multiple streams of income. It is not just their...
Oh, and there's insider trading going on. It's like, oh, they start a war and now their Raytheon stock just went up. Now they're, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So, I mean, it just points to this general corruption that I think all Americans now across the aisle are becoming quite aware of and are sick of and tired of, which is why, like, where I'm running, yes, I am running as a Democrat, right? I'm running against a Republican. I considered running as an independent, but in our two-party system, you really can't win running as an independent. But I think that no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you're starting to recognize that, like, they're all kind of taking money from the same donors and the same PACs and the same foreign lobbies and the same blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, I'm over here like, hey, I overdrafted when I was checking out at Dunkin' Donuts on the drive here to get a little quick caffeine boost. So like, I think that if we had more people in office who like, we understand what's broken, we've lived through it, and we're also willing to look outside of the way things have always been done. I think once you get into like a rut, into a groove, you can no longer think innovatively. Like all of these politicians in New Jersey were like, let's get rid of the plastic bags at the grocery store. And like, yeah, we need to get rid of the plastic because it's just going to live on in our planet for the next like hundreds of years, right? It's not going to decompose. And when it does, it'll be microplastics and then nanoplastics. And now there's a teaspoonful of nanoplastics in our human brains. Do we know that? Yeah, it's crazy. But like, the way that you inspire behavior change isn't by telling people you have to sacrifice or struggle. It's by being like, I have a better alternative for you. Here, have this bag made out of seaweed. It functions the same, but it doesn't harm the planet. Why aren't we subsidizing solutions instead of subsidizing the same old that is harming all of us? Everything has only gotten worse in our lifetimes. 100%. It's time for a better way.
More than time. So how do you respond to critics who say universal childcare is too expensive, given what we know about the long-term economic returns of early childhood investment? We look at Mamdani, we see, he is making it possible for New York City. He is pressuring the governor to tax the billionaires, the millionaires, real estate tax. And he has, people there. I was just listening to iHip News, and I forget the gentleman that they had on, but he was a millionaire or a billionaire in New York. And he's like, the point of being rich is that you don't have to think about your money.
I saw that exact same interview where he was like, you can increase my taxes by 2.5%. I'm not even going to feel it. I won't know. He's like, I don't even know. My financial director won't even mention it to me because it's not going to hurt me whatsoever. I read something just like a day ago that was like, the reason why so many Americans conflate millionaire and billionaire is because it's such a large, vast number that psychologically we can't wrap our heads around the difference. It is so much closer. 1,000 and a million are so much closer together than a billion. Like, I saw someone take a roll of paper miles away and hold the roll of paper out of the car window to be able to demonstrate the worth of Elon Musk versus the one little sheet of paper that was a regular person. Or like the rice visualization, like Minna Lee Jameson has done. It's really helpful, I think, for people to see like, here's your one little half of a grain of rice. And here's a room full of rice. Nobody gets to that level of wealth on their own. It's on the backs of the labor of working people like you and I. But people have this aspirational goal of like, I want to be wealthy, which is why I'm like, we need to stop calling it the wealth tax. Call it the billionaire tax. There's less than 1,000 of them in the whole country and they have more than half of the wealth. It's unfair.
And some of them acknowledge that. They're like, actually, so, and to his point as well, I'll have to find his name and put it in the caption. He said, he's like, I have at where I live a doorman, I have valet service, I have people to bring me my groceries. I want them to be able to live in New York City to get to their jobs to help me. If they can't afford to work in the city, then I'm not going to be.
My conveniences will go away.
Exactly, and like and guess what though?
My comfort.
Right, and he's like, and I want them to be able to live comfortably enough that they can send their child to college, and their children have health care and all of those things. And I'm like, I don't understand why the rest of these billionaires can't also wrap their heads around that. And obviously, Miss Rachel's a huge pusher for this.
Miss Rachel, thank God for the moms.
Thank God for the moms. When we look,
oh wait, I didn't answer your question.
Okay,
you said like.
I didn't even realize. Sorry, Jen.
You said like, what do I say to people who say that that childcare for everyone is too expensive? So I don't even call it universal childcare because I feel like the certain factions of the political spectrum have weaponized certain words. If I use the word universal, it's going to be a problem. She's going to be, she's a crazy radical leftist. And I'm like, how about we just look at what we are subsidizing and the impact that that has and who it benefits. And then we look at what we are not subsidizing and the harm that that causes to the economy. So like it impacts our GDP when women don't have the ability to participate in the workforce by hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. A. B, the subsidies that we are using our tax dollars for currently, we're subsidizing, let's say, the people who have a full-time job working for these billionaires, be it at Amazon or Walmart or XYZ, because they can't afford healthcare or they can't afford whatever. So like ultimately the handouts are going to the billionaires. The wealthy, the wealthiest among us are benefiting from our tax dollars. And then we get shamed for needing access to subsidized healthcare. If they just paid a living wage to everyone, and if everyone could get access to the same healthcare system, there are so many things that we could fix.
Yeah.
Where there's a will, there's a way. And the people in power currently got there because they got money from people who have money to give. I mean, there's a visualization of how much money Elon Musk put into the most recent elections. You saw it, right?
Yes. And I think, too, the other thing with Elon Musk specifically is that he is willing to fund things. Like, he'll tweet, oh, I'll fund TSA. It's like, if you're willing to fund TSA, then why aren't you willing to just let us tax?
Well, I'll tell you, it's because when they can frame it as philanthropy,
Yes.
they're the saviors, and then they get press coverage around how wonderful,
Well, like
and they're
Trump,
solving
I'm
the
gonna create a
problem.
problem, and then
Yes,
I'll fix
yes,
it.
yes. I'm so tired of this. They are gaslighting us all on like a massive level, and then we're seeing propaganda from foreign countries who are cutting through all the nonsense. And everyone's seeing the same propaganda.
Yeah, Trump's
And I'm
it's
like,
open again, the strait's open. And we're like, it was open before. Like, you're not the hero.
The Legos.
They sure have. I think they might be
they're
okay
fine.
with it too.
Okay.
So moving into women's rights. So post Dobbs, reproductive rights are on the ballot everywhere. Where do you stand? And how do you talk about this issue in a district that leans conservative?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've already gotten into this a little bit, right? Where I talk about like in the and this isn't just a district that leans conservative. This is what I would characterize as the most like sanctity of life focused congressional district in the country. For 45 years, it's been held by the guy who leads the pro-life movement. But I need everyone to understand that like pro-birth is not the same as pro-life. And I want as many kids born into our world as possible. And I want those families to then be able to support those kids and those kids to be able to thrive. And so often when I talk to folks who come from Christian or Catholic spaces, they'll point to like, the church has a food pantry and the church has this. And it's like, well, not everyone feels safe and secure to go into those spaces or welcome there or comfortable there. And they shouldn't have to rely on the church for those things. It's great if the church wants to like supplement and give more and offer the village that everyone is looking for. But we have a separation of church and state for a reason. And state should be making it so that we can provide for our kids, especially if we're paying tax dollars. No taxation without representation. Our kids deserve representation, I would imagine. But then to answer your question on like, where do I stand? I stand on business. Like I should be making any decisions about my body with my doctor, no one else. And you can point to, oh, but there's carve outs, there's exclusions, you know, when it comes to abortion. I can't tell you how many doctors will delay care that is life-saving to a woman because they're worried about losing their license, or they're worried about being sued, or they're worried about a medical malpractice lawsuit, or they're worried about being put in jail. There are certain states in the nation that will literally imprison a doctor for taking care of their patient. And so we need to protect that sacred sanctity of life of the mothers as well, and their ability to make decisions about their own bodies. We have a consent problem in America. Men thinking they have a right to our bodies and to children's bodies too. No more. At all levels of society, back off.
100%
Back off. Like I will even come out and I will say, hey guys, I had a missed miscarriage. I needed a DNC. See, medically and legally is the same thing. So whether you're having an elective abortion or a medically necessary abortion, that is the same procedure, medically and legally. There's no way to distinguish between it. And there are women in America who have died because they could not get access to the treatment that they deserved.
Yes, mothers with children.
And it's
at
often
home.
Black women.
It is.
Because we have a serious maternal and infant mortality crisis in America, and it's like 3 times worse for Black women.
Horrible.